The term early access is not something that tends to elicit a positive reaction within the gaming sphere, as titles found under this coinage are often fraught with bugs, and can sometimes take years to reach a state that buyers would consider a finished product. And occasionally, they never quite reach that state at all. Larian Studios, the creators of Baldur's Gate 3, have a history with early access, but it's actually one that's quite positive. Just like they've done with Baldur's Gate 3, their last game, Divinity Original Sin 2, was also put into early access before its release. Now, I never did jump into that one early, but I did play the final release with a friend, and we like to think of it as the best game we never finished. In fact, despite never reaching the credits, we put almost 80 hours into it. The game is jam-packed with content and has almost everything you could want from an RPG. While it's far from finished, Baldur's Gate 3 looks to be heading in a similar direction, if not towards something even better. At this point, I've already done 2 playthroughs of what's available, and with the exception of a few hiccups along the way, I couldn't be more impressed. There's so much depth here, both story and mechanic-wise, that allows you to tackle the world and its problems however you see fit. To give you an idea of just how detailed this game is, they've even recorded dialogue for characters to say after they've died, just in case you have a spell or magical amulet that allows you to speak to the dead. With details like this in mind, it's not hard to see why this game has taken this long to develop. You can tell the devs are pouring their hearts and souls into this thing, and they want to make sure that each new mechanic or item that they add has a meaningful impact throughout the entire experience. For me, going through this a second time truly helped highlight just how much depth and variation Baldur's Gate 3 has packed into it, even in the first act alone. For instance, if you don't have a certain companion with you, there's a good chance you completely miss out on little encounters placed around the world that foreshadow who or what certain characters really are. Bringing different companions with you on your journey can also unlock unique reactions during dialogue, especially when you use them to speak for you. Everything from their race, class, and history can affect what's available to say during conversations, most notably if they have some kind of tie to whoever you're talking to. It can make for a ton of interesting moments, like using Lae'zel to interact with a Githyanki patrol, or having Astarion present during a conversation with a vampire hunter. And don't forget, all these things can affect your character too. If you choose to play as a tiefling, for example, you'll end up with a ton of extra options when it comes to interacting with other members of your race.
This isn't El Terrell, and I'm not responsible for every damn tiefling in the world!
Just be responsible for yourself then. We have to stay. It's the right thing to do.
Zerg. Fine. We'll stay. If we survive, it'll make for a good story, I suppose.
Because of these factors, my 2 playthroughs ended up being so vastly different that it almost felt like I was playing completely separate stories. Both the end goal and the smaller choices I made along the way were very unique between the 2 characters, and I didn't even have to switch up my alignment from good to evil in order to achieve that kind of result. I simply made slightly different choices, landed a few more rules, and maybe spared a couple of goblins where I hadn't in the first playthrough. That alone opened up an entirely new chain of encounters, where I was able to interact with certain factions as a neutral party, rather than as an enemy. When it comes to choice, the game always allows you to go about completing your goals however you see fit. It doesn't matter if the route you take is good, evil, or somewhere in between. Now, actually succeeding at what you want to accomplish is a completely different story, as Baldur's Gate 3 does have a lot of RNG. It's not like, say, Fallout for instance, where once you have a high level in charisma, you don't really have to worry about failing most speech checks. Being based on D&D, there are dice rolls involved here, and if you're a newcomer to the system, the mechanics can feel a little awkward at first. They definitely took me a bit of getting used to, and that's despite having played other tabletop RPGs. That said, once you get used to it, it can be a great deal of fun, especially when you succeed at some of the harder difficulty checks where the odds seem stacked against you. Like most turn-based RPGs, the RNG is also heavily present in the combat too, so you will have to spend some time, at least towards the beginning of your adventure, figuring out what range will give you the best chance to hit with certain spells and weapons like the crossbow. Thankfully, you can get super creative with the combat here. Not only is the environment highly interactive, allowing you to do things like shoot down chandeliers or set patches of oil on fire, but you also have the ability to push enemies and throw items from your inventory. I even managed to kill a goblin with an apple at one point. Now, while that last example might lead you to believe that this game is too easy, Baldur's Gate 3 actually requires a good deal of strategy. Again, ignore the fact that I killed someone with an apple. Even on normal, the game can be quite difficult, particularly when you're engaged in some of the bigger battles, and you and your companions are completely outnumbered. The level of freedom makes for a really nice balance though, where if you can get crafty enough, there's a good chance you'll come out on top. Baldur's Gate 3 offers very few restrictions gameplay-wise, but obviously there are still some limitations. For instance, if you and your party manage to knock someone unconscious, you can't then take them prisoner like you might in actual D&D. Will we get mechanics like that in the future? Maybe. But for now, I do think it's important to remember that implementing that sort of thing is no walk in the park. Similar to being able to talk to animals and the deceased, they'd have to record additional lines of dialogue for every single character that you might hold prisoner. And that's not even taking into consideration the technical side of things. Gameplay mechanics aside, if you're a newcomer to D&D, the world itself can also take a bit of time to get accustomed to. You gotta remember that this is an IP that's been around since the 70s, so there's a ton of lore and mythology that's helpful to know if you want to feel a part of this world. I mean, even the character creator has 7 different races that you can choose from, many of which have multiple sub-races, and I believe they're still planning on adding more. Thankfully, Baldur's Gate 3 does an excellent job of explaining its world to you in a way that doesn't feel forced. For example, through their banter, companions and other NPCs can clue you into important details such as how various races feel about each other.
Fool. No point in showing a mad dog kindness, it'll still bite you in the end.
You've a sharp tongue, elf. Would that your mind proved its equal.
Half-elf. I suppose the finer details are lost on a creature like you.
The whole experience is very newcomer friendly, and it's mainly thanks to that strong emphasis on world building. Another thing that should help immerse you in this universe is the fact that this game doesn't really have any background NPCs. Every single character has something to say, even if it's just a line or two of dialogue, and interacting with them feels a lot more intimate than it does in other turn-based RPGs like Wasteland or Divinity, thanks to the fact that the camera in this game doesn't stay zoomed out. The dialogue cam is more along the lines of what you might see in a game like The Witcher or Elder Scrolls, so not only do you get to hear that great voice acting, but you also get a much better idea of how the characters are feeling based on their facial animations. Even in this unfinished state, Baldur's Gate 3 honestly feels like a much better RPG than a lot of other games out there. But that's not to say that it too doesn't have its own problems. In fact, it has a ton. For example, while the visuals are absolutely gorgeous, animations can range anywhere from super realistic to Mass Effect Andromeda bad. And autosaves can also get pretty annoying, as they tend to freeze the game for a second or two. Truth be told, I could go on and on about the little bugs here, but given the fact that they'll likely be patched out sooner or later, I don't think there's a huge need to get too worked up over them this early on in development. Especially since, aside from the minor issues, I honestly didn't have a whole lot of major problems, other than abilities and spells disappearing from my hotbar, and a few missing NPCs that prevented me from completing a couple of quests. But again, there's a reason this game is still in early access. And that leads us to the big question. Is Baldur's Gate 3 worth getting right now? For most of you, I would say there's really no harm in waiting. In fact, it's what I would recommend doing if you're not absolutely dying to give this one a go. Not only will you be able to play more than just the first act once it fully releases, but you'll likely be able to do so without having to deal with all these bugs. Now, for the rest of you who like me were dying to give this game a try, I have to say that even after 2 playthroughs, Baldur's Gate 3 still left me eager for more. It's got impressive visuals, an enjoyable soundtrack, a lot of player freedom, and great writing. If you don't mind the idea of doing multiple playthroughs, you can definitely get your money's worth here, and the game will only get better between now and the full release. With that said, that's going to do it for this review, so thanks for watching. Let me know what you think if you end up playing Baldur's Gate 3, and as always, I will see you in the next one.